February 1258. A man walks slowly through his own treasury. Guards move beside him, one on each side, but they are not his guards. He looks at the gold he spent half a century protecting. Gold that bought silks. Gold that paid scholars. Gold that filled vaults so deep they seemed endless. While his soldiers went without proper armor, the men escorting him watch his face closely. They are waiting to see if realization has finally reached him. He says nothing. Behind him, his city is already burning. Ahead of him waits something worse than fire. This is Caliph al-Mustasim, ruler of Baghdad, commander of the faithful, spiritual successor to Muhammad himself. In 3 hours, he will be dead. Not by blade, not by arrow, not by any method history usually remembers. Because the men who destroyed his city followed rules most of the world had never encountered. And what they did to his family was not simply execution. It was design. A blueprint written in blood, meant to be studied. A single demonstration, so precise and complete that no king from Damascus to Delhi would ever need to see it repeated. For 5 centuries, Baghdad had been the axis of the world. Not just an empire, but thought itself. This was where Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics merged with Islamic law, where human knowledge was gathered, organized, preserved. The House of Wisdom alone contained texts that would take 3 lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra here. Al-Razi wrote medical works Europe would not translate for 400 years. Scholars traveled from Spain to Samarkand just to sit in Baghdad's academies. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Water flowed through underground canals engineered generations earlier. Markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Hospitals treated patients regardless of wealth or religion. This was not Rome in decline. This was a civilization operating at full capacity. And ruling over it stood the Caliph. Not merely a king, not simply a political figure. The Caliph was the successor to Muhammad, spiritual authority over millions, legitimacy traced through 37 generations. Al-Mustasim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a government rotting slowly for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still commanded religious authority, but its armies were largely mercenary forces. Provincial governors ruled like independent warlords. The treasury was full, but rarely used for defense. Baghdad had survived weakness before. It had endured civil wars. It had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and collapse while its scholars kept writing and its markets kept trading. So when reports arrived of horsemen in the east, horsemen who had erased the Khwarezmian Empire, who had emptied cities across Persia, who did not stop for rivers, mountains, or negotiated borders, Baghdad noticed and did nothing. Because the Mongols were not an army, they were a system, refined across 50 years of continuous warfare, across frozen steppe, desert, and mountain range. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind something unprecedented, not just conquered territory, but a doctrine, a way of war that could be repeated, scaled, taught. And one of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was tasked with carrying that system west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai gave Hulagu a single objective: secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not defeat, submission. The Mongol Empire was not built on occupation. It was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early kept their rulers. Their walls stayed standing. Their markets remained open. Their people lived. Cities that resisted stopped existing. Every target received the same sequence: Mongol envoys arrived first. They carried written terms: submit immediately, send tribute, provide hostages, usually the sons of rulers, acknowledge Mongol authority. Compliance meant survival. Refusal triggered nothing at first. No threats, no ultimatums, just silence. Weeks passed, sometimes months. Life continued inside the city. Defenders began to believe the Mongols had moved on. Then the horizon filled with horsemen, not chaos, formation. Cavalry units moved with coordination. Siege engines arrived on wagons. The army surrounded the city completely. Every gate, every road, every escape route. Then came construction. In full view of the walls, the Mongols assembled siege equipment. Trebuchets designed to throw stones weighing hundreds of pounds. Engineers from China and Persia worked beside Mongol soldiers. The defenders watched machines being built specifically to dismantle their city. A second embassy arrived. The terms were repeated word for word. This was the last chance. Most cities surrendered here. If they didn't, the siege began. Not as panic, but as procedure. Walls collapsed in calculated sections. Infantry advanced in units. Cavalry sealed escape routes. The city fell methodically. Once inside, the population was sorted. Artisans spared, scholars spared, engineers spared. Everyone else was taken outside the walls. What followed was not random violence. It was systematic elimination. Survivors were resettled deep inside Mongol territory. The city itself was often burned, not as punishment, but as evidence. By 1257, Hulagu had applied this system across Persia. Nishapur refused. Its population was eliminated. Merv refused. Systematically depopulated. Herat refused. Reduced to ruins. Refusal echoed across generations. And now Hulagu turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, 3 Mongol riders arrived at the Caliph's court. They carried a single letter. You have heard what happened to the cities of Persia. You know the cost of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and your city will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter arrived on a Thursday. By Friday, debate had begun. Al-Mustasim summoned his advisors. The court divided immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, urged submission. He laid out the facts. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded hundreds of thousands of soldiers. It had fortified cities, mountain strongholds, all gone. These are not raiders, he said. This is a system refined over 50 years of war. We cannot fight them. We can only survive them. He recommended immediate compliance. Open the gates, pay tribute, surrender before the siege began. Baghdad's military commander disagreed. The Mongols were steppe cavalry, he argued. They excelled in open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. The Mongols were far from their supply lines. They could not maintain a prolonged siege. A third faction invoked theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate. God would not allow pagans to destroy the house of the Prophet's lineage. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a crisis of this scale. Contemporary accounts describe him as devoted to luxury and scholarship, uncomfortable with military matters, deeply trusting in the authority of his position. He looked at Hulagu's letter. Then he made his decision. We are the Caliphate, he said. We do not submit to threats from horsemen. The envoys were dismissed. No tribute sent. No preparations made. Ibn al-Alqami tried once more. If we refuse, they will come. Then let them come. the Caliph replied. On September 24th, 1257, the envoys left Baghdad carrying nothing but confirmation of refusal. What followed was more revealing than the refusal itself. The Caliph did not mobilize the army. He did not reinforce the walls. He did not open the treasury to fund defenses. Life continued as if inaction itself were a strategy. 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's army began moving. On November 11th, Mongol scouts appeared 30 miles from Baghdad. Reports reached the city, 5,000 horsemen, no siege equipment visible. The military commander saw opportunity. If this was an isolated force, Baghdad could destroy it in open battle and discourage further advance. The Caliph agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east, 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry, the largest force assembled in decades. They carried 3 days of supplies. On November 15th, the armies met northeast of the city. Baghdad's cavalry charged. The Mongols retreated, calmly, deliberately. Baghdad pursued, then the flanks closed. What followed was not a battle. It was dismantling. The Mongol retreat continued for nearly 2 miles, still controlled, still precise. Baghdad's cavalry pressed forward, convinced they were breaking the enemy line. Then, without warning, the landscape came alive. From gullies to the north and south, Mongol cavalry units surged into view, not scattered, timed, coordinated. The force Baghdad had chased, barely 4,000 horsemen, had been bait. Now, 15,000 surrounded them. What followed was not combat as Baghdad understood it. It was execution at speed. Mongol horse archers fired while riding at full gallop. Their composite bows punched through armor from 200 yards. Baghdad's cavalry tried to regroup, but formation had already collapsed. Officers shouted commands swallowed by noise and confusion. Horses panicked. Lines dissolved. From the infantry's position, the scene was unmistakable. The cavalry wings vanished into a storm of arrows and movement. Panic rippled through the ranks. The infantry broke and fled toward Baghdad. The Mongols did not pursue them. Instead, they tightened the circle around the remaining cavalry and eliminated them methodically. By nightfall, it was finished. Of the 20,000 who had marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The Caliph's personal guard was gone. The mercenary cavalry was destroyed. Baghdad's field army no longer existed, not routed, not scattered, erased. When the survivors staggered back through the gates and delivered their reports, the nature of the threat finally became undeniable. This was not a raid. It was a trap. A small Mongol detachment had been used to draw Baghdad's army into open terrain, where it could be dismantled with precision. The Mongols had chosen the battlefield, the timing, and the outcome. By December, the main Mongol force appeared on the horizon. Baghdad's walls were all that remained. On January 11th, 1258, Hulagu completed the encirclement of Baghdad. An estimated 150,000 soldiers took their positions. Fortified camps rose at every gate. Guard rotations were established. Supply lines stretched back through Persia. Escape became impossible. The Mongols began building siege engines in full view of the city. Chinese engineers worked beside Mongol soldiers, assembling trebuchets with geometric precision. Baghdad's defenders watched day after day, calculating exactly what these machines would do to walls that had stood for 5 centuries. On January 17th, Hulagu sent another embassy. The message was shorter. The time for full submission has passed, but the Caliph may still preserve his life. Open the gates. present yourself. Order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days, and the population will be spared. The Caliph convened his remaining advisors. Ibn al-Alqami spoke plainly. There was no field army, no allies coming, no realistic chance of holding the walls. Religious scholars again invoked divine protection. The Caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No response was sent. On January 29th at dawn, the trebuchets began firing. Not randomly, not for intimidation, systematically. The Mongol engineers had spent weeks measuring wall thickness, identifying weak points, calculating impact angles. Stones struck the same sections again and again. Each blow created fractures invisible at first, but cumulative. The bombardment continued for 8 hours. Then it stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further under their own weight. On February 1st, the bombardment resumed, focused entirely on the compromised sections. By afternoon, cracks were visible from inside the city. By evening, the eastern wall began to fail. On February 5th, a 90-foot section collapsed. Mongol infantry advanced, not charging, but walking. Units entered the breach, secured it, and expanded outward block by block. Baghdad's remaining garrison attempted resistance. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and exhausted. By nightfall, the eastern quarter was lost. On February 10th, the Caliph sent an envoy to Hulagu's camp. The message was brief. I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city. Hulagu's response arrived within hours. Present yourself tomorrow, alone. On February 13th, 1258, the Caliph walked out of Baghdad. He did not come alone. With him walked 3,000 members of the court, sons, ministers, scholars, generals. They passed through the gate unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them immediately. Not threatening, just present. The procession moved through the Mongol camp in silence. Soldiers watched without expression. No insults, no violence, no celebration. Hulagu received the Caliph in his command tent. His first question was not philosophical. Where is your treasury? The Caliph hesitated. He spoke of tribute. Hulagu repeated the question. Directions were given. Soldiers went to verify. 3 hours later, they returned. The vault had been opened. Inside were thousands of gold ingots, silver coins by the ton, jewels accumulated across generations, silk enough to clothe an army. Hulagu ordered the entire treasury documented. Then he ordered the Caliph brought to it. The Caliph was escorted back through streets now controlled by Mongol soldiers. Smoke rose from distant buildings. Doors were open, vaults exposed. Hulagu walked him through room after room. They did not speak. They didn't need to. Why was this wealth untouched while soldiers went unpaid? Why was gold locked away while walls crumbled? Why had nothing been done? Persian historian Rashid al-Din later recorded that Hulagu ordered the Caliph to eat his gold, to consume the wealth he valued more than his people's survival. Whether this occurred literally remains debated. What is not debated is what came next. The Mongols followed Tengrist beliefs. One of their core taboos was clear. Royal blood must not touch the earth. To spill it directly invited cosmic imbalance. So nobility was executed differently. The Caliph was wrapped tightly in a carpet, arms bound, legs immobilized. He was laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward. They did not trample randomly. They were led slowly, deliberately, across the wrapped body again and again. No blade, no proclamation.